Hi, everyone. So glad to be able to join the conference today. Thanks for inviting me to speak on this topic, global funding landscape. Um, I know that this, as Phil just mentioned, the global funding landscape has changed drastically since the beginning of this year, when the USAID has been shut down. And I hope to use this time to share, first of all, what has happened. Second, what are the impacts? And third, how can churches and Christian organizations respond? So first of all, what has happened? USAID is the main US agency that is responsible for foreign aid and humanitarian assistance. And the defunding or shutting down of USAID has a huge impact because more than 40% of all humanitarian aid in the world, or tracked by the UN, comes from USAID. In 2023, the amount is close to $71.9 billion. And as a comparison, the total UN expenditure is only 68.5 billion, even less than that. So you can imagine what the consequences would be as the funding for development, humanitarian aid, and also a lot of health-related efforts around the world, all those funding have been cut very quickly. We've seen the headlines like these days, nearly 500 million of food aid at risk of spoilage, leading to food insecurity, child malnutrition, healthcare in Africa on brink of crisis as the US exits WHO and USAID freezes funds, the world's richest men taking on the world's poorest children. And BBC calls this an earthquake across the aid sector because a lot of life-saving programs have been cut. And we see a snowball effect as well. So since the USAID has been cut, other countries, especially Western countries, have followed suit. The UK, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Finland, Germany, etc., they have all started cutting foreign aid. And they are moving foreign aid to domestic spending, especially defense spending. And a lot of papers and research have been looking into the impacts of these international aid cuts. We are really facing an international aid crisis here. So it's shown that USAID cuts trigger a widespread humanitarian crisis, reversing decades of progress in healthcare, education, and economic development across developing nations around the world. We see a loss of basic medical services in developing nations, severely impacting maternal and child health. 95 million people are affected. And for children, a lot of, it's estimated 23 million children are losing access to education, and this further endangers their development opportunities. And apart from the economic impact, we see a huge human cost. More than 3 million lives are at stake, and these are all preventable deaths. And with the reduction in funding, we see all these preventable deaths increasing because of a reduced healthcare access. There has been data looking at how many preventable deaths there are, and as of June 19th, there are 103 preventable deaths per hour. So even as we speak now, you can imagine 103 deaths occurring, and most of the deaths are coming from health-related initiatives that have been, their funding has been cut. So there's a report called Lives on the Line. If you're interested, you can go online and look at the report. It talks about the human impact of these foreign aid shifts. We know that lives are at risk when healthcare services, when basic education, etc., all those services are cut. Vulnerable populations are most affected. And we know that most of them are women and children. They are at increased risk of abuse and violence. People with disabilities, refugees, asylum seekers, they are among the most vulnerable population. And there's a lot of community confusion in terms of when the funding is abruptly cut. There are a lot of panic, frustration among local communities and local authorities, not understanding why and not being able to handle the consequences. We see a weakened humanitarian system and coordination mechanism. Because of reduction in funding, there is also a reduction in coordination efforts by organizations. So I really appreciate FEVER doing this conference and pulling people from all over the world together, because these kind of coordination mechanisms are actually being weakened now as we speak. There's a shrinking humanitarian funding landscape. NGOs are facing financial collapse because a lot of NGOs actually rely on institutional funding, and those are cut. A lot of large-scale layoffs have been announced, and smaller NGOs are struggling to survive. And for organizations that are involved in development and relief work, we see not just a shrinking sector, but we also see an immense loss in trust among the communities that we serve in, because it seems that like for partners, we can abruptly stop our partnership. There is pressure to respond to rising needs among the communities that we serve in, but that's more difficult with the reduction in funding. We do face ongoing donor fatigue. There's increasing permission for donors to step away, similar to the snowball effect I mentioned earlier on. And a lot of donors are increasingly thinking aid is ineffective. And this is actually rhetoric that we often hear in the news or in social media nowadays. And as institutions shut down, there would be a loss of data expertise and institutional knowledge as well. For example, the USAID website was shut down immediately, and reports that are usually on the website, they're no longer available. So that's a huge loss of data and institutional knowledge. So how are we to respond as churches and Christian organizations? We face a poly crisis and a perma crisis right now. And I think we really need to have a prophetic voice and prophetic presence. We really need to let the world know that this is not as it should be, but that God's presence and power and strength are tangible and it's in the here and now. As Dr. Manchit was sharing just now, we need to pray, lament and grieve for the loss, for what's happening, and intercede on behalf of those who are suffering. We need to seek God's wisdom, and especially in our particular individual context, in the country that we are in the work that we do, how can we respond to his call? And at the same time, rest in his hope, knowing that his power and his might is able to accomplish more than we can imagine. We are called to speak truth to power, and especially with our action by choosing who we are serving, what we are doing. We're actually showing a stance of the church with regards to who is our neighbor. And this who is our neighbor is extremely important because we are engaging in a battle of narrative. The prevailing secular narrative right now is one of nationalism and protectionism. So the narrative is such that our money should go to our own country to help our own people. Why are we sending money overseas to help poor people in other countries? We need to protect ourselves first. There's also the narrative of framing foreign aid as wasteful or bogged down in bureaucracy. Humanitarian assistance is seen as a political tool. So the criteria of whether we should send foreign aid is to ask, does it make America stronger? For instance, does it make it safer? Does it make it more prosperous? This is really a very secular narrative of functionalism and self-centeredness. And as Christians operating with our faith, we really need to engage in this battle of narrative and to show that this is not true. We believe in serving everyone because everyone is made in the image of God and everyone has inherent dignity and value, not just people within our own country, but people in other countries as well. They are our neighbors. And when we talk about the more than 3 million preventable deaths, this is not talking about some faraway problem in some faraway country. But this is our problem. We collectively own this problem because it concerns the whole of humanity. So we really need to put forward the values argument. This is not about national security, not about transactional assistance, but about who we are called to be and how we see everyone made in the image of God and everyone having inherent value. So as churches and Christian organizations, we must speak up. We must mobilize our own grassroots networks because there are a lot of public support out there for foreign aid, but a lot of people are actually silent on this topic because they may not have the tools or platform or networks to voice out. And a lot of us in this call, I believe, have the platforms and tools and networks to actually voice out. So really encourage us to do, to tell real stories of real people having real impacts. And in addition, as Dr. Manchit was also talking just now, sharing, we really need to have stronger collaboration and partnership. There is a need for collective response instead of competition. There is going to be limited funding resources, and this is not going to be reversed in a short period of time. But instead of competing for limited resources, we need to put off organizational self-interest and remind ourselves that we are all acting under the big umbrella of God kingdom, and that we are engaged in a broader vision and mission. We need to identify new partnership models and collaboration opportunities with each other. We need to ask ourselves, how can we use our network well? We need to be creative and to evolve and adapt. Maybe doing less is more. We might have to consider our organizational footprint. How, for example, how does our headquarter office work with field offices or regional offices? Is there some way to make it more efficient? We might need to find some focus. We need to cut down on some things and then focus our energy on some other things. We need to consider alternative ways of fundraising, maybe blended finance, diversifying our income source, looking into impact investing and strategic philanthropy. And we need to be faithful in telling stories of the people that we work with and to be able to document social impact to those who may not understand how development and relief work. So thinking about how to make aid more effective would be part of our calling as well. So this is my sharing today. Thanks again for having me.